November 30th, 1922. The Times of London ran the story that electrified the world. A royal tomb, sealed for 3,000 years, intact, untouched, had been found in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor. The announcement credited two names: Howard Carter, British archaeologist, and Lord Carnarvon, his financial backer. Two names. One of the greatest discoveries in human history. A century of books, documentaries, museum exhibitions, and primary school lessons have repeated those same two names ever since. The name that wasn't there: Almina. If you've ever watched a documentary about King Tutankhamun, if you've read about Howard Carter, the curse, the discovery, you've never heard her name. And that was by design. Her full name was Almina Victoria Marie Alexandra Wombwell. Born April 14, 1876, in Mayfair, London. Registered officially as the daughter of Captain Frederick Charles Wombwell, a retired British Army officer and businessman, and his French wife, Marie Boyer Wombwell. That registration was a polite fiction. The kind of fiction that Edwardian society maintained with considerable social energy. The kind that protects reputations while distributing money in plain sight. Her actual father was Alfred de Rothschild, not a Rothschild connection, not a Rothschild affiliation. Alfred Charles de Rothschild, director of the Bank of England, son of Lionel Nathan Rothschild, heir to one of the most storied banking dynasties in the world. Alfred was a bachelor his entire life, which placed him somewhat at the margins of the Rothschild family's institutional concerns, but left him in possession of an enormous personal fortune. He kept a house in Mayfair at 1 Seymour Place, one of the first private residences in London to have electricity installed, and a country estate at Halton in Buckinghamshire, where he maintained a private circus, complete with trained animals and performers, for the entertainment of his houseguests. He was flamboyant, extraordinarily well-connected, and by any reasonable measure, one of the richest private individuals in England. He was also Almina's father. In polite society, he called himself her godfather. No legal document ever confirmed the paternity. Burke's peerage listed her as daughter of Mr. F.C. Wombwell, but the Rothschild Archive's own family records state plainly that Alfred had an illegitimate daughter from his relationship with Marie Boyer Wombwell, and that in 1895, that daughter married George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. It was an open secret. Everyone in the relevant social circles knew. Alfred's behavior confirmed it in the only language that mattered in that world: money. He made it known to society that he would settle a substantial fortune on Almina when she married. Any prospective husband could do the arithmetic. The question was, who would be willing to overlook her illegitimacy and the half-Jewish, half-French origin of her father's wealth? The answer turned out to be someone who needed the money very badly indeed. The 5th Earl of Carnarvon was, in 1895, in a position that many English earls found themselves in at the end of the 19th century: land-rich and catastrophically cash-poor. He had inherited the earldom in 1890, and with it Highclere Castle, 300 rooms, 6,000 acres in Hampshire, rebuilt in the Jacobean style by Charles Barry during the same period that architect was raising the Houses of Parliament. The estate was magnificent, the debt behind it enormous. Carnarvon had gambled away significant portions of his inherited wealth. The estate's annual income was insufficient for its upkeep. Without a substantial injection of capital, Highclere was on a slow trajectory towards sale, or subdivision, or simply managed collapse. What Almina brought to the negotiating table was exactly what was needed. Alfred de Rothschild provided the marriage settlement on June 26, 1895. the day Almina and Carnarvon married at St. Margaret's, Westminster. Carnarvon's 29th birthday. Almina was 19 years old. The settlement included a covenant to transfer £500,000 to the trustees of her marriage settlement, equivalent to roughly £57 million in 2025. Rothschild also cleared Carnarvon's existing debts before the ceremony, approximately £150,000 worth, before a single vow was spoken. He arranged a life annuity of £12,000 per year for Almina, and he continued to support the household financially throughout his lifetime, funding renovations at Highclere, electrifying the house, updating its plumbing. The marriage was transactional in ways nobody bothered to disguise. Carnarvon was willing to overlook Almina's illegitimacy and her father's heritage because he had no practical choice. Almina got a title, a castle, and a place at the center of English aristocratic society. Carnarvon got solvency, Highclere intact, and enough capital to pursue the interests, horses, cars, Egypt, that would define his public identity. One account describes the arrangement's social geometry plainly. The marriage propelled the socially marginal Almina into the center of high society as Countess Carnarvon, while at the same time wiping out Lord Carnarvon's large debts and giving him enough money to care for the estate. Without her Rothschild connection, Highclere would have crumbled. Without Highclere, there is no expedition. Without the expedition, there is no Tutankhamun. The couple had 2 children in the early years of the marriage. Henry was born in 1896 and would become the 6th Earl. Lady Evelyn was born around 1898. After the children, Carnarvon's focus drifted increasingly toward Egypt. He had first visited in 1889. A serious motoring accident in Germany in 1909 damaged his lungs, and doctors prescribed winters away from the English climate. Egypt became an annual commitment, and with Egypt came Howard Carter. Carter had been working in the country since 1891. In 1907, the director of Egyptian antiquities, Gaston Maspero, recommended him to Carnarvon for excavation work at Deir el-Bahari, near Thebes. The professional partnership took shape slowly. Carter was methodical, patient, and convinced the Valley of the Kings held tombs the previous excavators had missed, a position considered professionally unfashionable among Egyptologists of the era, most of whom thought the valley was exhausted. In 1914, Carnarvon obtained the formal concession to dig there, replacing an American amateur named Theodore Davis, who had resigned after years of diminishing returns. Carter began a systematic search. The First World War interrupted the work. Excavations resumed in late 1917. Year by year, Carter covered the valley floor. By 1922, after 15 years, he had found almost nothing of significance. The money that kept those seasons running was Almina's. From 1907 onward, the Carnarvon expedition was sustained by the capital she had brought to the marriage, the Rothschild money flowing through the estate she had saved from collapse. Carnarvon had no independent surplus. One source summarizes it directly. In addition to saving the castle, Rothschild's fortune also financed Lord Carnarvon's pet passion, Egyptian archaeology. Multiple independent historical accounts reach the same conclusion. Much of the money that funded Carter's searches in the Valley of the Kings came from Lord Carnarvon's wife, the wealthy Almina. Lord Carnarvon's wealth came from his wife, which came from the man believed to be her father. Then came January 1918. Alfred de Rothschild died. His estate was valued at approximately £1.5 million. He left Almina the freehold and entire contents of one Seymour Place, described years later when it went to sale as one of the finest small mansions in London, containing a reception hall, 6 reception rooms, a library, a study, 6 principal bedrooms, 10 secondary and staff bedrooms, and 5 bathrooms. plus £50,000 in cash. Her husband and each of their children received £25,000 from the estate. This inheritance changed the arithmetic of the final excavation years in a way that isn't ambiguous. From 1918 through November 1922, Almina's directly inherited Rothschild capital funded the expedition's most critical phase. The surviving documentation confirms it. It was Almina's inheritance from Alfred that enabled her to support her husband's final exploration in the Valley of the Kings. Without Alfred's 1918 bequest, there may not have been a 1922 season at all. By that autumn, Carnarvon had already decided it would be the last he would fund. He had spent approximately £50,000 on the project over 14 years, roughly £10 million in today's money, and Carter had very little to show for it. One document makes Almina's standing in the expedition unusually concrete. A telegram in the Metropolitan Museum of Art archive, dated May 3, 1920, 2 full years before the discovery, is sent from Lady Carnarvon to Carter and states that Lady C and H.C. have sole rights over the excavation. She was asserting joint legal control over an enterprise still 2 years from its climactic moment. That document exists in a museum archive in New York. It's almost never mentioned in public accounts of the discovery. On November 4, 1922, one of Carter's workmen uncovered a stone step in the rubble near the entrance of Ramses VI's tomb. Carter stopped work immediately. He ordered the staircase carefully excavated. 16 steps emerged, leading to a blocked doorway bearing seal impressions. Carter filled the staircase back in and sent a telegram to England. He sent it to Carnarvon, not to Almina. The message read, "At last we have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." Carnarvon and his daughter Lady Evelyn sailed for Egypt, arriving in Luxor on November 23, 1922. 3 days later, with the tomb's doorway fully cleared and bearing cartouches of Tutankhamun, Carter made a small breach in the upper left corner and held a candle through. Carnarvon, standing in the corridor behind him, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." Almina was in England. She had accompanied her husband on some of the earlier Egyptian seasons. She wasn't in the Valley of the Kings on November 26, 1922. The event that her money had made possible, the moment that justified 15 years of expedition financing, she learned about from across the Mediterranean. The telegram had gone to Carnarvon. The Times of London, which had already signed an exclusive reporting agreement with Lord Carnarvon, broke the story on November 30th. Howard Carter and his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, had made the discovery. The exclusive agreement was Carnarvon's. The credit was Carnarvon's. The press coverage generated Lord Carnarvon's name as the discovery's patron, stamped that name into the global record, and left it there. Carter, in the first volume of his 3-volume account of the excavation, dedicated the work to the memory of his beloved friend and colleague, Lord Carnarvon. Almina appears in Carter's text at most in passing, mentioned once in connection with having moved her hospital from Highclere to London. A biographical footnote after 15 years as the financial architecture of the entire enterprise. The erasure wasn't a conspiracy. No one gathered in a room to write Almina out. What happened was quieter, and in many ways, more durable. Victorian and Edwardian coverture law meant that money a woman brought into a marriage was legally managed through her husband or his trustees. The excavation concession was in Carnarvon's name. The Times exclusive was Carnarvon's arrangement. Carter dealt directly with the Earl. That was the professional relationship he had known for 15 years. When the historical record crystallized around the names present at the opening of the tomb, Almina was structurally absent from the moment itself, and the record followed what it had witnessed. Structural erasure produces the same result as deliberate erasure. The name disappears. The story continues without it. But before the discovery, and running concurrently with every season Carter spent in the desert, Almina was conducting a different operation entirely, one that has its own terms and its own accounting. September 1914. 6 weeks after Britain declared war on Germany, Highclere Castle opened as a military hospital. Almina was 38 years old. She had prepared for this before the declaration was even formal, undertaking nursing training by mid-1914, organizing the hospital's logistics, assembling staff and equipment. When the first patients arrived, she was ready. The official Wartime Memories Project record describes Highclere's hospital as 20 beds, organized by the 5th Countess of Carnarvon, with Lady Almina acting as matron. Matron isn't a ceremonial designation. It means she ran it. Ward administration, clinical oversight, staffing, the daily operation of a medical facility inside a private house in Hampshire. She assembled a nursing team, reportedly dressed in pink uniforms. Patients received silver service dinners. They had access to the castle's library and common rooms. For men arriving from the trenches, from the mud and shrapnel and gas, this was a quality of care that must have seemed almost implausible. She made beds, she dressed wounds, she sat with frightened men in pain and read to them. She told them how brave they were. The hospital specialized in orthopedic and surgical cases. By 1917, it was one of the few facilities treating Royal Flying Corps patients, particularly burns cases, some of the most demanding wound care of the war. She accepted cases other facilities found too difficult because her resources and her commitment allowed it. Her husband's response was to give the arrangement a sardonic nickname. He called it Carnarvon Amputate Highclere, a dark joke about the transformation of his ancestral home into a surgical theater. It tells you something about the emotional gulf between his world and hers. He was the one who would get the historical credit. She was the one in the wards. Demand outgrew Highclere's 20 beds by 1916. Almina opened a second hospital at Bryanston Square in London, with the formal approval of Lord Kitchener. That facility ran through the armistice and didn't formally close until February 1919. For much of the war, she was administering 2 operating medical facilities while her husband spent his winters in Egypt. The financial backing for the hospitals came substantially from Alfred de Rothschild. Almina made personal visits to her father to secure the necessary capital. But the organizational intelligence, the clinical judgment, the daily physical presence, that was Almina. The current Countess of Carnarvon, Lady Fiona, who published the first substantial biographical account of Almina in 2011, writes that she demonstrated her excellent nursing skills and extreme compassion. She went on to found Alfred House Nursing Home in London in 1927, named after her father, her godfather, as the public fiction had it. She was still practicing medicine 2 decades after she had first converted Highclere's bedrooms into wards. The soldiers she treated sent letters of thanks that were preserved and documented. The historical record of the field her money had built would offer her nothing. Carnarvon fell ill in March 1923. A mosquito bite became infected after a razor cut. Septicemia progressed to pneumonia. Almina, in England, received the news and traveled immediately, a mercy flight across Europe and the Mediterranean, and arrived before her husband died. On April 5, 1923, at the Continental Savoy Hotel in Cairo, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon died. He was 56 years old. Almina was present. On April 14th, she transported his remains back to England. He was buried on Beacon Hill at Burghclere, within sight of Highclere Castle, the castle her money had saved. What followed in the press wasn't about Almina's loss, or her decades of financial commitment, or the fact that she had just buried her husband in a foreign country and carried him home. What followed was the curse. Arthur Conan Doyle suggested that elementals, created by Tutankhamun's priests, had guided the mosquito that killed Carnarvon. Stories circulated about all the lights of Cairo going out at the moment of his death, about his dog at Highclere howling and dying simultaneously. The story became mystical, prophetic, supernatural. And in that transformation, Almina was erased again. Her grief, her loss, her financial legacy, the 28 years of work she had underwritten, none of it could survive inside a narrative about mummies and ancient revenge. The curse was a better story than the funder. It still is. That is why you haven't heard her name until now. But the legal reality continued past the mythology. After Carnarvon's death, the excavation concession was transferred to Almina. Carter spent subsequent seasons acting on behalf of the Carnarvon estate. On behalf of Almina. Official documents from the period confirm it. The contract and a concession were with Almina, Countess of Carnarvon. In early 1925, she reached a settlement with the Egyptian government. She gave up any claim on the contents of the tomb in exchange for £36,000 compensation. That isn't a footnote. Egypt negotiated the ownership of the world's most famous archaeological find with Almina because she was the party who held the rights. Carter, whose name fills every chapter of this story, was during those months acting as her agent. The £36,000, roughly £2 million in today's values, is the legal signature that confirms her standing more concretely than any historical argument. You can't settle a claim you don't hold. The sum she accepted was almost certainly far less than the collection's actual worth, but by 1925, Almina's financial position was fracturing. In April 1925, the same year she settled the tomb claim, the New York Times ran the headline, "Will sell Rothschild art. Almina Lady Carnarvon offers collection for bids, May 19th. The artworks Alfred had assembled over a lifetime, Canova sculptures, valuable paintings, significant furniture, went under the hammer. The inheritance that had funded the expedition, the hospital, and the castle was being liquidated. Her second marriage, to retired Grenadier Guards officer Ian Onslow Denistune in December 1923, 8 months after Lord Carnarvon's death, generated more legal chaos than stability. The Denistune divorce case of 1925 became one of the most publicized court proceedings of the decade. The presiding judge, Sir Henry McCarty, called it the most bitterly conducted litigation I have ever known. Almina's finances and reputation emerged from it damaged. Through the late 1920s and into the 1930s, she ran Alfred House Nursing Home. Colonel Denistune died in 1938. She moved to Regent's Park, then to a cottage in Somerset. She continued to live beyond her means. Around 1951, she was declared bankrupt. Her debts exceeded £30,000, including an unpaid tax bill of £22,000. She had spent, over the course of her lifetime, the equivalent of roughly £50 million. The Mayfair mansion sold. The artwork sold. The nursing home closed. The castle? Her son's. Now comes the part that requires only the facts stated plainly. The facts are sufficient. Henry George Alfred Marius Victor Francis Herbert became the 6th Earl of Carnarvon on April 5, 1923, the day his father died in Cairo. He was 26 years old. He inherited Highclere Castle. He inherited 6,000 acres in Hampshire. He inherited the earldom, the title, and the Carnarvon name, the name that within months would become synonymous worldwide with the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The name Almina's money had made globally famous. The estate came with death duties of approximately £500,000, the equivalent of 30 to 40 million pounds today. These were crushing. He sold portions of the Egyptian collection. He sold the racehorses. He relied substantially on his mother's continuing financial assistance during the years when the estate was most precarious. One account of the period is explicit. He turned to her for help, and Almina obligingly gave him proceeds from the sales of the Egyptian collection and the horses, as well as much of her Rothschild inheritance. She helped him keep the castle. Then he called her a scheming swindler and issued a legal writ against her for monies owed. Let the sequence sit exactly as stated. He inherited the castle her money had saved. He held the title her marriage had secured. He accepted the financial help she provided when he needed it. He called her a scheming swindler. He went to law against her. After the 6th Earl died in 1987, an inventory was taken of the castle's contents, and during that process, the remains of his grandfather's Egyptian collection were found within the castle. They are now on display at Highclere. Even his death couldn't change the fact that those artifacts were there because of her. In 1954, at the age of 78, Almina moved to Bristol. The address was 19 Hampton Road in Redland, a 3-bedroomed Victorian terraced house in a row of similar houses. Her grandson helped arrange the purchase. She lived there with her housekeeper and companion, Anne Ledbetter, who had been in her service for years. She had lived at Highclere Castle with 18 male indoor servants on the floor above. She had run 2 military hospitals during a world war. She had negotiated legal settlements with the government of Egypt. She had funded the excavation that made Tutankhamun a household name in every country on Earth. She was now in a terraced house in Bristol, and most of the people who walked past her front door had never heard of her. She died in May 1969. She was 92 years old. Anne Ledbetter found her choking on a piece of gristle from a chicken stew. An ambulance came to 19 Hampton Road. Almina was taken to Frenchay Hospital in Bristol. She died shortly after arriving. Her ashes were scattered on the grounds of the Highclere estate. The woman who had funded Tutankhamun's discovery came home to the castle as ash. The 6th Earl, Henry, the scheming swindler man, held Highclere until his death in 1987. He left an estate valued at £21.3 million to the family. The castle and its 6,000 acres passed to the 7th Earl, and then to the 8th, who inherited in 2001. In 2010, a television series began filming at Highclere Castle. Downton Abbey depicted the domestic dramas of an English aristocratic family navigating the early 20th century. War, class, money, love, through the corridors and rooms of a great English house. The show ran for 6 series, produced 2 feature films, and became one of the most watched British television dramas in history. Its central location was Highclere. Its central dramatic premise was the tension between an aristocratic family struggling to maintain a magnificent estate and the outside money that had always been required to keep it standing. One of the show's central characters is Lady Cora, Countess of Grantham, a wealthy woman who had injected her fortune into a failing English estate and, in doing so, secured her position at its center. The character is American in the show. The template, drawn from Highclere's actual history, is Almina. Before Downton Abbey, Highclere attracted approximately 30,000 visitors per year. After the show debuted, visitor numbers more than doubled. The castle now draws tourists from around the world to walk the corridors that Almina organized as hospital wards in 1914, to stand in the rooms she filled with 18 indoor servants and silver service dinners, to visit the Egyptian exhibition in the cellars, an exhibition that tells the story of the 5th Earl and the discovery of Tutankhamun. The 2009 Sunday Times Rich List assessed the Highclere estate at £30 million. More recent estimates place the castle's value somewhere between £192 million and over £300 million, depending on the calculation. The show that made the castle internationally famous has generated millions in filming fees, tourism revenue, and commercial licensing. The Carnarvon name, Almina's legacy, Almina's gift, is now a global hospitality and heritage brand. The exhibition in the castle's cellar credits the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. The Sunday Times listed him as the Earl's great-grandfather, who helped uncover Tutankhamun's tomb. A great-grandfather, not a great-grandmother. Not the woman who supplied and sustained the financial architecture of the entire enterprise and settled the legal claim to the discovery after her husband died. The man who was present for the final 3 seasons and died 6 months after the opening. In 2011, the current Countess of Carnarvon, Fiona, the 8th Countess, published Lady Almina and the Real Downton Abbey, The Lost Legacy of Highclere Castle. It was the first sustained institutional effort to restore Almina's name to the historical record. It came 88 years after Almina had flown across Europe to sit by her husband's bedside in a Cairo hotel. The subtitle calls her legacy lost. It required almost a century for the institution that holds the castle she saved to say her name fully and clearly in public. So here is the story assembled in its actual sequence. A woman named Almina, born illegitimate in 1876, inherited one of the greatest private fortunes in England. At 19, she married an earl whose estate was collapsing and saved it with her money. Over the next 3 decades, that Rothschild capital funded the renovation of a castle, the raising of 2 children, the conversion of that castle into a military hospital, the treatment of wounded soldiers across 4 years of war, 14 seasons of excavation in the Egyptian desert, and ultimately, the discovery of the sealed tomb of Tutankhamun in November 1922. When the telegram announcing that discovery was sent, it went to her husband's name. When the Times ran the story, it credited her husband. When Carter dedicated his 3-volume account, he dedicated it to her husband's memory. When Almina negotiated the legal settlement that formalized the world's ownership of what was found, she received £36,000 and no acknowledgement. Her son inherited everything built on her money, called her a scheming swindler, and let her die in a terraced house in Bristol. The castle she saved is now worth hundreds of millions of pounds and is known worldwide as the home of Downton Abbey, a show about an aristocratic family sustained by a wealthy woman's fortune. A wife deserves to be loved. She funded an obsession she wasn't present to see fulfilled, married to a man who nicknamed her hospital with a dark joke, and wintered away from it. A mother deserves respect. She raised 2 children, helped her son rescue the castle she had already saved once with her own money, and was rewarded with a court writ. A war hero deserves honor. She ran 2 military hospitals for 4 years, treated men other facilities couldn't manage. A grandmother deserves to be kept from poverty. She died in a terraced house in Bristol, choking on chicken, with no one from the family that bore her money's legacy anywhere near the bedside. In each role, she gave everything she had. In each role, the story moved on without her name. Her name is Almina. Not Lady Carnarvon, not the Countess, not Lord Carnarvon's wife. Almina, the illegitimate Rothschild daughter who arrived at 19 with £500,000 and built the financial foundations of the most famous archaeological discovery in history, who spent 4 years in hospital wards treating men from the front, who carried her husband home from Cairo and then negotiated the legal rights to a pharaoh's tomb on her own, and who was thanked with silence by the institutions that held what she had built, and with a court summons by the son who inherited it. You know her name now. That is precisely how the record gets corrected. Not by institutions with plaques and exhibitions, Not by dedications and 3-volume archaeological treatises. Not by television shows that film in the castle she saved while leaving her name off the credits. By people who hear a name once and refuse to let it go quiet again. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.